Everybody out there in YouTube world, we got another stack of parts. Can only mean one thing. We've got another project. As you can see and have seen so many times before, we got a stack of Teraflex parts here that we are going to throw at our next project. We have used Teraflex products on so many different builds. There's just so many reasons that we gravitate back to them when we're getting ready to start on something new. Of course, same thing with Milestar. Milestar tires, we have run the Gen 1 mud terrains in the Patagonia, the Gen 2s, the XTs. Run the XTs on a couple of our personal vehicles that we've really loved, and they've just served us so well. Here it is, our latest JK project. This thing is a 2017, again, four-door JK. This thing is going to be built for daily use, nothing extreme, but it will be well equipped for running local trails, driving back and forth to work, trip down to Moab, just the daily driver that's not going to be too extreme, but not a plain Jane JK that you see at every stoplight when you pull up. When you seem to own one color, you find everybody else that owns the same color. So we're going to personalize this thing a bit, make it, again, its own vehicle for the owners, and I think it's going to look really good. We're going to use the products that we're so familiar with, and first we've got to get these wheels and tires off of here, get the new Nomads tested to make sure that bolt pattern is right, the clearance is good, and then we'll get the new Milestars put on those Nomads as we're getting ready to get this suspension torn out of here and get the new in. So follow along, we'll get going on this thing. Alright, so this is the Nomad wheel that they've chosen for this project. And again, want to make sure that the bolt pattern is correct, clearance is good. Oh yeah, fit right on there. Plenty of room behind the caliper. Those are going to look nice. Those of you that have seen our videos before, our installations and builds, have heard me beat the drum of Teraflex and their quality instructions, as well as their packaging system. They've got a paint by number system, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the boxes that it's going to take for the control arms, the springs, the extra components and accessories. We've got our new Falcon shocks back here, and these little boxes are the rash rings for the Nomad wheels. So what I'm going to do, they come in red, white, and black, I believe. These are black, and what I'm going to do is paint them to match that khaki, so it kind of offsets things, separates it a little bit. But Teraflex has always had some of the best instructions out there in the business, so those of you that don't do builds or Jeep modifications regularly can have comfort in knowing that you're going to have a good detailed set of instructions with Teraflex stuff. So what I'm going to do is get this stuff unpackaged. I'll probably start getting these prepped to paint. That way they've got a good amount of time to set up before we put them on the wheels. Okay, so I've got the Jeep lifted, the axle supported. One of the things I'm going to do, just simply because it makes things easier, is pull this plastic skid plate off of here. It's held on by about a half a dozen little plastic clips. I'll pull one out and show you. I could probably do it with this on here, but the extra 5 to 10 minutes that it takes to pull this thing off will give me so much more room. So first things first, I'm going to get this thing off of here. Okay, like I said, it's just some little plastic clips. It's basically a tension clip that holds it in there. They're reusable. If you don't have a trim retainer tool, something like this is really cheap, but it makes all the difference in the world in trying to get that off of there. First thing I need to do is take this exhaust, we'll call it a skid plate cross member, off and out of the way. It's held on by 3 18mm bolts. So we're going to start there by getting that, like I said, out of the way. For the next step, I need to remove this track bar bolt. Next, this drag link needs to be loosened so I can drop this drag link out of the way. Okay, then I'll just support this up here so it's out of my way while I work. Next step is going to be to get these shocks out of the way. The next step is going to be to take the sway bar loose, but before I do that, I wanted to take this brake line retainer off of this spring perch. It's just a 10 millimeter. There's a single bolt in there that holds it in, but that way when this axle starts to drop, there's not too much stress or pressure put on these brake lines. So there's one on each side. That's it, so just get that out. Okay, for both sides I do have that brake line retainer bracket removed from the spring perch, and I also have, as you can see, the sway bar connects removed on both sides up and out of the way. Next step, I need to take the drive line out so I can get ready to drop this axle to get the springs out. First I will loosen all of the control arm bolts. I will just loosen them. I won't remove anything at this point, front and back on both sides, upper and lower. Alright, now that I got those loose, I just need to pull this drive line back and support it out of the way. I've already got a bungee cord sitting up there. Okay, in order for me to loosen the control arm, the upper rear control arm bolts, I have to take these heat shields off. 10 millimeter wrench again. Prepare yourself, these things suck. Especially the top. The top on the driver's side is the worst because of all the exhaust. You know, if that drive line's, if you do it before the drive line is up there and in the way, it's definitely easier, but it's still hard to get your hand in here. So there's one on the driver's side and passenger, and again they do cover those bolts for the upper rear control arm. As mentioned earlier, now I've got to loosen the upper and lower control arms. I've already loosened the upper. Those are 18 millimeter. The lowers are 21. This side you have to hit from the outside with an impact. The exhaust is in the way. So now I've got the upper and the lower control arms loose but not removed. Something that I want to point out real quick, I did unclip the ABS, the brake line stuff right here. This is the vent tube for the differential, and pulled it away, and then I slid this clip down and moved this out. What that'll do is give enough slack when I drop the axle down to remove these coil springs that none of this is stretched too tight. But when you're lowering that axle, you always want to make sure you keep an eye on this stuff so none of it gets stretched or damaged when trying to remove these coil springs. Alright, so I just had one of those moments that I want to go bang my head up against the wall for my own stupidity. This right here, I didn't take out the factory bump stop. So now, because of my ignorance, I get to undo everything that I previously showed you so I can remove these springs. Of course, I have to unhook all of this stuff, drop the axle down so I can get these springs out of here in order to access this bump stop. Crucial step. While the old springs are out, before you put the new ones in, be sure to take out this speed bump. So I gotta do more work because I overlooked it. So I wanted to point it out instead of trying to sneak it in there. I want to point this out real quick. If you are not familiar with doing lifts, or this would be your first time, as you put this together, when you put the new springs in, one thing that is crucial that you want to look for, you'll see that the end of this coil spring is sitting snugly in this perch. That is to ensure that things are lined up as it needs to be. And you'll see on the top as well, when you pull that down, this isolator on top will most likely have an indentation or a crease or something in it, but always make sure that the bottom of that coil spring is lined up in this spring perch at that locking point. Now it's time to put these front shocks on. I'm just going to do the top. I'm going to leave the bottom loose or not mounted while I still move this front end around. Now the next step is to connect the sway bar quick connect disconnect post. So this is basically it on both sides, and this nut gets torqued to 75 foot-pounds. Alright, now that the quick disconnect stud is installed, torqued, we'll put the sway bar link in place. And it's going to be a little bit offset because the track bar is not connected, and I'll be putting a new one in, and once that's in I'll line things up. But if you're doing this, you'll notice a slight pitch in it. Now that I got the sway bar connected with the sway bar links to the axle mounted quick disconnect studs, what I need to do now is put a bracket up top, so when these sway bar links are disconnected, they've got a place to rest while we're off-road or the Jeep's out on trails, whatever. So this bracket will go up here. I got to remove this front body mount, and then I'll put it on there, and then another quick disconnect stud will go up here, so this link can rest up there while the sway bar is disconnected for any kind of trails. Pretty simple process. When I put this body mount nut back on here, I will torque it to 80 foot-pounds. Now this hole up here for the upper quick disconnect stud is threaded, so the stud will thread in there, and then there's a nut that'll go onto the back that I can lock into place with a wrench back there. The Nomad Wheels have these rash rings. They're a beadlock simulator. Many of the parts stores, CarQuest, some Napas actually can mix factory paint colors into a rattle can. So that's what we've done with this. Okay, I got the paint laid down on the rash rings. While I wait for these to dry, I'll get back onto that suspension and continue working on it. These are going to highlight those Nomad wheels really nice. Alright, now that everything is set here, the next step is going to be to take these factory lower control arms out. I want to make sure that there's not a lot of pressure or tension on this, because I don't want some kind of a shock load bouncing this around when I loosen these or take these bolts out. So just be careful of that. Try to make sure there's a little bit of play or wiggle room. Move to the other side and do the same. The next step, and this isn't going to be easy, I'm going to try and film it, but this metal bracket that was mounted in here to begin with needs to be removed. There we go, I think that's it. So, it is a fight, but you can do it with vice grips like that. I did put the brake lines, the ABS lines, back on the correct side of the shock. I went ahead and put the bolt in, but I want to show you how this bracket works. I'm going to throw the label side out, and you can just mount it. It literally mounts right on that shock bolt. Okay, that's it. I'm going to leave these shock bolts loose, but the last thing that I need to do now is put the new front track bar in. We'll be ready to move to the back after I reconnect the driveline. Okay, about the last thing that needs to happen on the front end is hooking the track bar back up. But since this has 73,000 miles on it and these bushings have a tendency to wear on them, we're going to go ahead and put a new adjustable track bar on here since we've got it apart. Had we left it stock, the wheel offset would be just a little bit off. Not that most people would notice, but it would track probably about a ½ inch difference. So got to get this off, put the new one in, and then we can hook the drag link back up and move to the back. Here's the new adjustable track bar. I usually start out around 33 inches center to center. And then of course, once it's on the ground, what I'll be able to do is fine tune it and center this axle as it should be centered. And then I'll be able to get this drag link put back in. The adjustable track bar is in, the drag link is connected. I'll torque everything down once it's back on the ground, because there will be some adjustments that need to be made, but for right now, I'll just kind of snug things up a little bit. Now I did loosen this tie rod to give me a little space and room to work, so I'll torque both of these again when it's on the ground. Everything up front is snugged. I will torque it when it's sitting on the ground at ride height. Next step as I work my way towards the back of the Jeep is to install these spacers in the exhaust. You can see there's two different lengths. Passenger side is the longer of the two. What I need to do is take a 13mm either wrench or ratchet, loosen the flange on the passenger side as well as back here on the driver. Sorry if the lighting isn't stellar, but there's also a clamp back here that needs to be loosened so everything can move. And then, like I said, we'll install these, tighten things back down, we'll move to the back of the vehicle and get going on that suspension over there. Okay, so this is one part on the exhaust that is a giant pain in the neck. This is right behind the Y-clamp. What you have to do is loosen this clamp so you can either grind or chisel this off to allow the exhaust to move. Alright, things are progressing nicely. Front is done, everything's snugged up. I'll torque it when it's sitting on the ground. We've got those spacers in the exhaust. Now we're going to tackle the back, so get this set of shocks removed, the track bar, I'll get it removed from the axle side of the bracket, the sway bar end links. Ultimately what we're trying to do is get everything loosened. Again, I will loosen the upper and lower control arm bolts, but not take them out, so things have enough room to lower and flex so I can get these coil springs out. Okay, so I've got the shocks out, I've got the track bar disconnected from the axle. Next thing I'm going to do is take these sway bar end links out. I want to make sure that that axle is well supported, because that's kind of the last thing, with the exception of the control arms, that's stabilizing that axle. Before the axle is lowered, we got to do a couple things. Right here is the vent tube for the rear differential. So this plastic clip needs to come out. The brake lines, we'll take this out, and these will pop some clips loose so this axle has room to travel without stretching into the ABS or the brake line. So that's going to be the next thing that I'll do. This little brake line clip right here, I was going to see if I could unlock it. If you get in there and pry it like that, she'll pop open, and then you can carefully pry that brake line out. A couple other items that need to be loosened up for that axle to have plenty of travel. It's going to be this emergency brake cables for both sides. It's just a 10mm nut. Well, there's a pair of them. Drop those down real quick. Last thing I need to do before dropping this axle down and getting those coils out, the stock or factory coil springs, I need to undo the drive line. I will just tie it up and out of the way. I always like to make a mark, whether you do or don't. I do something just to ensure that it goes back in the same position and location that it came off, in case there's any kind of balancing issues. Most of the balancing obviously is in the drive line. Alright, with that out of the way and supported, I can now drop this axle and get those old coil springs out. Everything is disconnected with enough room for travel, so I can start lowering this axle down to get the factory coil springs out, replace them with the new. So that's going to be the next step. Now I'm going to just knock those control arms loose a little bit. I will be replacing the uppers with the new arms in the kit, but by loosening them, it will allow this axle to move a little more free. The uppers are loose, the lowers are loose. Now I'll drop this down, pull these coil springs out of here. Now that I got the coil springs out, it gives me a little more room to work, so I'm going to pull both upper and lower control arms and replace them with the new. I'll do them one at a time. Alright, these pigtails need to be bottomed out in that isolator like I showed in the front springs, and the pigtail, or the end where it bottoms out, has to be faced towards the rear of the Jeep. I'll take a picture to show you how that spring and isolator should be oriented. Okay, I've got the coil springs in. There are retainers top and bottom. I didn't want to go through the time expenditure of showing all of that to make this video any longer than it has to be. I did put in the new sway bar in links. Next, I've got to do this track bar relocation bracket, and it is going to secure in place with the lower control arm bracket bolt, and then they provide hardware. So when it does, it goes in here, and then there's a U-bolt that goes around there, and then that's where I'll mount this track bar to keep that axle centered. So there will be some hardware that goes in here. Okay, I got the bracket on. Now to get the track bar bolt to line up with the hole in the track bar, I just use a simple tie-down strap that allows me to pull the axle one way or another to help align this up. Right now I'm just going to start buttoning things back up, which is basically the reverse order of what I showed with everything coming apart, and then I'll have to move that evap canister, of which I'll show too. This is one of the last steps before I throw the shocks on, get this thing down on the ground, put it on wheels and tires, and torque everything at ride height. This evap canister has to be clocked just a little bit for clearance for this drive line. So what you have to do, the instructions show, you have a couple holes you have to mark, drop this down, of which I've done now. I'll throw a spacer or a block of wood or something in there so I can widen and open these holes a little bit. And then I'll just move that over and mount this evap canister skid plate in the new holes, again, to clock it a little bit. Okay, one of the last things that I need to do, because of this limited travel on this vent tube for the rear axle where it was mounted, it just needs to be relocated. There's actually a little clip on it, so I'm going to run it through here. There's a spot up top inside the frame and on the body that I'm just going to attach that clip to. Okay, that's done. We get these rear shocks on. We're going to get this thing on the ground. That's it. Now I got to get everything on the ground. I'll get it setting at ride height. I will check for clearances on brake lines, travel with the shocks. I'll torque everything down, and then I've got to center that front axle. But there it is. That is the 3-inch sport lift. We'll move on, get this thing down, and get it on wheels and tires. Now that is looking more like a Jeep should look. Just snug these up a bit, and then like everything else, we'll torque them in the end. Alright, everything is installed. The track bar allowed me to center that front axle. Everything is torqued down. Time to take this thing on a shakedown run. What I'm going to do next, this thing has been shaken down. I took it out. Everything did great. It's settled in. One thing that I didn't point out that I probably should have before taking it out, that steering wheel needed to be clocked or corrected. We do have a video on the channel here to show you how to correct a crooked steering wheel. When you throw a suspension lift on, it does have a tendency to clock that a little bit. But with all the modern sensors and everything that's in these newer vehicles, that steering wheel has to be straight, otherwise you start fighting the traction control system. So that was done. I'm going to get this thing up in the air. As that suspension has settled, I want to make sure that the torque specs are still great. I'll get the front skid plate put back on there, and then we'll get it back on the ground, clean the wheels and tires up, throw the color matched rash rings on so the owners can get this thing home and start enjoying it. So I'm going to get it up in the air, get back to work. All right, I'll come back through and torque all of these to 30 foot-pounds, and the rash rings will all be color matched and set. Here it is, the completion of phase 1 of Project A.D.D. This is our average daily driver. This thing is 2017 JK, sitting on Milestar's Patagonia mud terrain 35 12.5 17-inch tires on the 17-inch Nomad wheels with the matching rash rings. What we did was got the paint coat off of this, painted those to match, so it provides a little separation. Good look. Those can always come off if they just want to run black at some point in time. The suspension under this, we've done a full install in this video of how the Teraflex 3-inch suspension goes on this JK. So that covers it. We've got some more things we will be doing to this JK, but you're going to have to check back and see what those additions and other videos are. So please check back. Thank you for taking the time to check out this video. We'll hope to check back and see some of the others.